announcing the arrival of our distinguished speakers, Mr. Khairi Jamaluddin and Yang Berbahagia Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud, accompanied by our beloved President Puan Mona Jamaluddin.
Tiada berpaling lagi, kita berteman seiring jalan dan seluruh sama-sama menjejak mimpi, sama-sama mencari dan menanti segalanya, direstui cinta sejati.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon, ladies and a few brave gentlemen. My name is Hawa Rose Omar. I'm your MC for today. Datuk Ramah Abdul Hamid, Honorary President of Persewa Malaysia. Puan Mona Jamaluddin, President of Persewa Malaysia for the year 2024-2026. Distinguished speakers, Mr. Khairi Jamaluddin and Yang Berbahagia Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Pan-Pacific and Southeast Asia Women Association, in short, Persewa Charity High Tea. Persewa is an international association. We had been around for more than 60 years. To be exact, 62 years. We were supported by loyal members, some of whom have left us recently. They are Almarhumah Nolayani Osman, Sarah Ashraf Muhammad Nordin, Datuk Munira Abdul Hamid, Datin Siti Rohani Muhammad Yunus, and the late Tan Sri Dr. Devaki Krishnan. I'm sure most of our senior Persewa members, they know all of them. Please join me to sedekahkan Al-Fatihah, and for our non-Muslim guests, you may hold a 1-minute silence. Al-Fatihah. Thank you, everyone. Since we just celebrated our 67 years of Independence Day, let us all rise and sing together lagu Jalur Gemilang. There are flags on your table. You can hold your flags and we shall sing Jalur Gemilang together.
Semangat Jiwa merdeka Semarak rayakan Apakalah melintang jalurnya Sama negara Malaysia Satu suara, satu semangat Kita semua berdamai Jalur gemilang di bawah naunganmu Jalur gemilang kami semangat satu persatuan Pertahanan amalan budi rakyat Malaysia Jalur gemilang suka kami terasa Jalur gemilang di bawah wawasan Lalu semangat kami semua
Wow. Such a fun song, right? I hope everyone enjoys singing together. Tak ada orang buat event lepas Merdeka kan? But Persewa boleh. Thank you everyone for being such a sport. I hope you dah warm up, Dah warm up, ya? Okay? Okay, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to give a very warm welcome to our president to say a few words. Puan Mona Jamaluddin.
Is for you and me. Oh, it's for the only one I see. V is very, very.
Ladies and gentlemen, and my beloved Persiwa sisters, Selamat petang and welcome to our charity high tea. As the President of Persiwa Malaysia, it is my honor to stand before you today. Your presence here reflects your commitments to the causes we champion, and for that, I am deeply grateful. We are especially privileged to have with us our distinguished guests of honor, Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud and Encik Khairi Jamaluddin. Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila, your pioneering work in humanitarian aid, public health, and now planetary health has had a profound impact, both in Malaysia and globally. Encik Khairi, your dynamic leadership continues to inspire us all. Thank you both for being with us. This event holds special significance as it coincides with Malaysia's 67th Independence Day and National Women's Day. These celebrations remind us of the sacrifices made for our freedom, the unity that binds us as a nation, and the vital contributions of women to our nation's growth. Women are often at the forefront of climate action, bearing the impacts while leading sustainability efforts. At Persiwa Malaysia, we are committed to empowering women and families, not just for their own betterment, but for the betterment of our planet. As we celebrate our nation's independence and contributions of women, let us renew our commitment to building a just, equitable, and sustainable world. I extend my deepest thanks to the organizing committee, volunteers, and sponsors who have made this event possible. Your dedication and support are truly appreciated. Selamat Hari Merdeka, Selamat Hari Wanita, and thank you.
More than anyone that you adore and love.
Thank you, Puan Mona. Short and sweet speech. I will not do justice if I didn't introduce our distinguished speakers, right? Thank you. Okay, let me, before they take the floor. Tan Sri Professor Dr. Jamila Mahmud is a renowned medical professional and humanitarian leader in Malaysia with over 2 decades of experience in health crisis management and disasters response. She currently serves as the professor and executive director of the Sunway Center for Planetary Health at Sunway University, focusing on sustainability and public health initiatives. As the founder of Mercy Malaysia, Dr. Jamila has significantly shaped the humanitarian assistance landscape in the region. Her impressive career includes pivotal roles such as Under Secretary General for Partnerships at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies and Chief of the World Humanitarian Summit Secretariat at the United Nations. She has been recognized with numerous accolades, including the Malaysian Merdeka Award and the ASEAN Prize. I think she deserves a clap. Dr. Jamila continues to advocate for the integration of sustainability into public health practices, inspiring others through her dedication and work. Meet our Mr. Khairi Jamaluddin, a notable Malaysian politician turned broadcaster. After a distinguished career in government where he served in multiple ministries, including as a Minister of Health during the pandemic. Mr. Khairi, I'm sorry I have to mention this. Khairi was expelled from the party for voicing concerns about its leadership. Embracing a new path, he harnessed the power of broadcasting to remain influential and reshape Malaysia's political narratives. Co-creating and co-hosting Keluar Sekejap. We are privileged to be here, actually. The country's leading podcast. Khairi has rapidly become a significant voice in political discussions, interviewing key leaders from Southeast Asia. Additionally, he joined the Breakfast Talk on Hot FM. Banyak peminat ya. Quickly driving it to the top of Malaysian radio, and his sharp commentary and engaging social media presence, including memorable TikTok dances. Khairi believes his public profile has flourished outside the mainstream politics, allowing him to set the political agenda and hold his former colleagues accountable through his dynamic broadcasting platforms. So I feel there's always a blessing, right, in whatever happened. Ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together for our two distinguished speakers, Mr. Khairi Jamaluddin and Professor Jamila.
It's now or never. Come hold me tight. Kiss me, my darling. Be mine tonight. Tomorrow will be.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Lagu pun tadi bukan main. Anyway, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good afternoon to everyone. Some of you may know this, but this hotel is actually owned by UMNO. I think it's still owned by UMNO. Anyway, it's the first time I've been back since I was expelled, so thank you very much. Terima kasih kepada Puan Mona selaku Presiden Persiwa. I think I don't know if the audience knows, but she's actually my elder sister. I've been forced to do this. And if that wasn't enough, the honorary president of Persiwa is my mother. So double forced. But Mama, Atuk Rahmah, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I'm very excited about this talk because Kak Mona has been planning this for some time. So she came to see me and said, look, I want to kickstart my presidency with a big bang. I never thought that she'd be president of something first before me. But anyway, that's the way it goes, right? And I said, okay, what do you want to do? She said, I want to do something interactive, something that will get the ladies, the members, thinking about something bigger than just the organization. So I said, why don't we do, and she said, do you want to do a podcast? And I thought to myself, well, would you want to listen to two men talking about things? I think, it'd be better representative if we had a lady to speak about something profound and consequential in this world. So both of us agreed that there was really no better towering woman personality at the global stage that represents Malaysia, other than, of course, our Tan Sri Dr. Jamilah Mahmud. Big round of applause to her. And I said, we can do this podcast style. So that's why we have this. And by the way, this is being recorded like a podcast because I told Kak Mona, in this day and age, it's not just one-off events because I think you have your Persiwa International Conference coming up. So we can edit this for you and you can pass it around to your other Persiwa chapters and they'll be really impressed. Like, oh, Malaysia has this talk about planetary health. And I think that would be a great way to introduce Persiwa Malaysia under your leadership to your international chapters. I've been closely associated with Persiwa because of Mama. There was one global conference that she couldn't go to in Taiwan, and I was happy to represent her. And of course, it happens to be a women's organization, if not probably the only women's organization in Malaysia that actually has a consultative status at ECOSOC, at the United Nations. So United Nations Economic and Social Council. Persiwa was there as one of the key stakeholders. So today we're going to start with a chat. I'm going to chat with somebody I respect very much, old family friend, turn colleague, turn mentor, about something very important. And I think in the spirit of wanting to get everyone involved, we've got microphones, I think, later, and we're going to open up to the floor so that you can ask questions. Ideally to Dr. Jamilah about the planet and not to me about politics. But I wanted to start by setting the scene, and we've got some nice photos later at the side of the screens about what we're going to talk about. But I wanted to start by sharing my impression and my story about how I view our guest of honor, Tan Sri Dr. Jamilah. So some of you will know Tan Sri Dr. Jamilah as your doctor. Aisha, my niece here, was delivered by Dr. Jamilah and her wonderful husband, Dr. Asha. I don't know if he's around. Hi, Dr. Asha. So that's her background as a physician, but also as a obstetrician and gynecologist. And of course, Dr. Asha and Dr. Jamilah were rock star obs gynae in Malaysia for many, many years. Of course, the hospital wasn't enough for her. She was, I told her in the waiting room just now, I said, Doc, you have been interested in life and humanity. So that took you from the delivery room, where you literally delivered life out into the field, into communities, and into humanitarian work, because that's also equally important. Life starts mainly nowadays in the delivery room of hospitals, but it has to be sustained everywhere. And we are privileged because we live in a country which is peaceful, relatively prosperous. We do quite well. But she went to the darkest corners of the world, where there was conflict, where there was natural disasters, where there was displacement of population, dispossession. And she created an organization to help people in need and to rebuild communities. And then from there, of course, her career progressed. And as was mentioned by the Master of Ceremonies, she went on to serve in international organizations. And in the latest chapter of her distinguished, wonderful career, she has now turned her attention to life, not just at the starting point of life in the delivery room, not just in the communities, but sustaining life on planet Earth. And she's dedicated this latest chapter of her life to what is known as planetary health. And that's what really we want to discuss today. Dr. Jamila, how are you?
I'm very well. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. Really good to see you again. You seem to have forgotten that I also worked with you in government.
Yeah, well, I was about to get to that. I omitted that because I wanted that to be the first starting point of our discussion. Don't know if we can increase Dr. Jamila's mic a bit so that everyone can hear. So I wanted to start by reminiscing a little bit before we go to planetary health. And that was during COVID. So this was about 2020. Dr. Jamila was appointed as the special advisor to the then Prime Minister, Tan Sri Mahyudin, for public health. And that appointment was so important because we were confronted by a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic where the whole country was locked down, the whole world was locked down, and we simply didn't have the instruction manual as to what to do next. And it was important that the Prime Minister not only had the counsel of the Ministry of Health, but also of an independent voice. And that came in the form of Dr. Jamila. I was then Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation. Subsequently, I was asked to become Coordinating Minister for Immunization of Vaccines. And then a year later, after Ismail Sabri became Prime Minister, I was asked to become Minister of Health. Tan Sri, maybe we can start off by sharing a little bit of your insights and experience as to how we got through COVID. What were some of the toughest decisions that you had to make as the special advisor to the Prime Minister on Public Health? And what lessons can we learn from COVID going forward?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there were many things that were problematic. First of all, this is a pandemic of a magnitude the world had not seen. So there are many firsts, and therefore there are many things that we don't know and expect to happen. So you have to almost be creative on the roll, right? And keep your eyes on the bigger outcome. The first thing I would say is that it has to be everyone involved in the management of COVID. So our communication to people, especially lay people, has to be very, very clear. Because if people don't collaborate and cooperate, then it's very hard to put a pandemic under control. The second thing I would learn, that the best lesson you learn is early vaccination. And I think, many people don't know the details of the vaccination program, but it was such an honor for me to work alongside you. Because I think your dynamic leadership, your willingness to listen, to try new things, was instrumental in us getting the pandemic under control. In fact, it's historical that we're back here because this is where we started our first PPV.
Yes.
If you remember, you had to register patients and I had to vaccinate patients.
Yep.
And then at the end of the day, there were still vaccines left and everyone told me we cannot waste any vaccines. So I had to run out and pull anyone who's around me to say, come and vaccinate, including the sweepers and the restaurant operators and so forth. So that early vaccination was really important. The third, I think, is, how do you rebuild trust? We were in a very difficult situation because politically it was a very unique situation at the time. And in that case, there's a lot of mistrust. So, and the fourth, I would say, is how do we be better prepared for the next one? Have we learned enough? Have we been able to put the lessons to good use? And if the pandemic happens again, are we ready to, rapidly scale up in our interventions? So getting everyone involved is very important, not just the Ministry of Health, getting the message out clearly, getting vaccinations early, and being prepared for the next one.
One of the most crucial interventions that Tan Sri made in this task force that we set up. So we set up a task force called CITF, COVID Immunization Task Force, because for those of you who are used to working in government is a huge bureaucracy and there are many silos. So one of the things that I asked the Prime Minister and the Cabinet was, can you allow me to set up a task force? And can I just cut through all the bureaucracy? And I think that was one of the best decisions that was made by the government. I roped in Tan Sri Jamila. We had the Deputy Chief of the Army, who's now the Chief of the Armed Forces. We had Deputy DG of Health, Dr. Chong. We had Dr. Jamila. We had Dr. Siti, KSU of MOSTI. Very dynamic people in there. And we made decisions very quickly. And it was implemented quickly. But within that task force, and we met almost on a daily basis at the height of the crisis, the crucial intervention was when I just wanted to share with you, because this is to do with Tan Sri's background and experience with humanitarian situations, where she always reminded me, she said, not everyone can get to a PPV. Because we thought, we set up a PPV dekat PWTC, dekat KLCC, dekat MyTech, all the big exhibition centers were PPVs, Pusat Pemberian Vaksin, Vaccination Center. So we assumed that, if you build it, they will come. But she always reminded us and reminded me, if you build it, most people will come, but some people cannot. Cannot maybe because they are sick. Dia pesakit terlantar di rumah. They are immunocompromised. They are neurodiverse. Or they are scared to come out for whatever reason. Or they are undocumented migrants. They are scared to come out because they're scared they're going to get arrested by the police or immigration. So that changed our entire strategy. So it became a strategy of no one left behind. So we pivoted from just having big vaccination centers to smaller centers, to mobile centers, to drive-through centers. Remember we had a drive-through centers for OKU and at Saim Darby in Arada Mansara, to calming rooms in our vaccination centers for kids with autism and neurodiversity. Remember there was that time where immigration came and said they want to post the immigration officer in the vaccination center. And then Tan Sri and Dr. Siti Hamisa were very vocal, the two Iron ladies, saying that, no, this is not an exercise to check your immigration status. We're here to save people. And in the end, they backed down. So do you remember some of these things we did?
Because you gave us air cover. I remember that. And I said to you, if we don't vaccinate the migrant workers, they are the ones doing the dirty demeaning and, all
dangerous
those dangerous jobs.
Yeah.
And, if we can't control, then some of them also working in factories. And I remember you said to me, you buatlah apa you nak buat, I don't think they will arrest you. So you remember that. And then I took a bunch of vaccines and a couple of volunteers and started vaccinating migrants. And I remember saying to the police and immigration, I think kalau I keluar newspaper, you arrest won't look good lah on the police and immigration. And I think that's how we broke the whole, and we went to the islands. And also, being adaptable to say that in some communities you need single dose vaccine. For example, migrants, refugees, undocumented, orang asli, because they may not come back for the second dose. So I think, having that menu of options is really important. But as I said, if you didn't give us air cover, we wouldn't have been able to do it, right? I think one of the best things I will say experiences in my life was the vaccination program. I think many people don't realize how successful our vaccination program is. Thanks to YB.
Thank you.
And when I go around the world and talk about it, I talk about it with pride, and people are in shock that we managed to be so successful.
Yeah. We got to becoming one of the fastest, I think, daily per capita at our peak. But anyway, thank you to everyone for helping, because all of you came and got your vaccines done. Brought your families, brought your kids, brought your parents, and that was really the key to success. Anyway, I enjoyed working with you, Tan Sri. I miss the good old days, but times changed. Now you've gone from vaccines to looking after planetary health. I've gone from being a health minister to a DJ on radio. I mean, things happen. We move on. Let's talk about what we have to talk about today, and I want to try to talk about it in ways that are as accessible as possible.
Okay.
Because it's a very, very complex subject. We always hear about climate change. We hear about planetary health. In fact, planetary health, I had never heard of planetary health until she told me about it. And she said, when I was at the Ministry of Health, I was looking at health, not just at what happens at clinics and hospitals, but also in terms of social determinants of health. Only 20% of health is treated at hospitals. The rest have to do with your water quality, education, nutrition, air quality, housing, whether you're exposed to harmful substances in your houses, in your housing material and things like that. And she said, well, you're on the right track. It's not just about social determinants, actually planetary health. Because I was just looking at it from the perspective of a person living in a country, but she said there are many, many things that are going on in the world that are actually reaching breaking point, and later, na'uzubillah, tipping point.
Yeah.
Tipping point is when you cannot reverse it anymore. So you can imagine that if I push this over my knee, once it reaches tipping point, I cannot stop it from falling down. So that's tipping point. But before we get to tipping points and planetary boundaries and things like that, Tan Sri, maybe you can explain in very simple layman's term, what does planetary health mean?
Planetary health is very simple. Our health, the health of human civilization, is very dependent on the planet also being healthy. It is so interconnected. That's a very simple explanation. So for that to happen, you need a multi-systems approach, because everything is connected. You cannot do things in silos, in individual entities, because you pull at one string, it is connected to the other. So as you said earlier, that the determinants of health, only 20% are in the health sector. So to be healthy, you need to be able to ensure there is environmental health, social health, economic health, so every other, the 80% of the other determinants need to be addressed. So health is not the purview of the health ministry alone. It is everyone's business. But what planetary health points to is that we have come to a stage where human beings are affecting our own health. It's the way we behave, the way we interact, the way we consume that has damaged a lot of the planet and therefore our health. The weight of things that are created and bought and built is now heavier than the weight of all living things on Earth. So this points to what we call the Anthropocene, or the impact of human beings on the planet.
Tan Sri, I was trying to think of an easy analogy, and this is not a perfect analogy to explain this, but what you explained just now is basically our planet can no longer, in a stable way, absorb the kind of activity we as human beings are doing anymore. For the last 10,000 years, there's been an equilibrium on Earth where, for instance, global temperature variance doesn't exceed plus minus 1 degree Celsius during the Holocene. This is a ecological period before, sorry to be a bit scientific. So for 10,000 years, global temperatures do not go up or down more than 1 degree Celsius. And that's fine. Sebab Tuhan buat bumi ini to absorb our activity.
Yep.
The Earth can absorb our activity. That means it can absorb the carbon emissions that we make. It can absorb the heat that's being generated. Everything is okay. Yeah, and you have these polar ice sheets at the North Pole and the South Pole, and they can reflect off the sun's heat in a way that is sustainable. So everything was quite in equilibrium, as God intended. But when we discovered industrialization, and then we started overconsumption, and then our reliance on fossil fuels, and we'll go into all these things later, this thing is a bit out of whack.
Yeah.
Because now it's gone past 1 degree Celsius temperature variance. Kan? Dan, maybe you want to explain what is this 1.5 degrees? But orang semua kata 1.5 degrees, 1.5 degrees. Is it 1.5 degrees is bad, is it? I mean,
1.5 is the limit. You cannot go beyond 1.5 for life to be sustainable. Once you tip 1.5, you will rapidly go to 2, 2.5, 3, and life on Earth cannot be sustained at these temperatures. We are already close to 1.5. And therefore, we need to not just focus on mitigation or prevention. We now need to also adapt our lives to be able to deal with this 1.5.
Yep. So when you get to a situation where we are in the Anthropocene, the earth that God created for us, it cannot absorb, and it doesn't have that self-healing mechanism because we've gone beyond that limit.
Yep.
And I used to only think that it was about climate change. Sebab kita selalu dengar 1.5, we have to make sure that we reduce our carbon emissions so that we can get down to below 1.5 and not get to 2 degrees Celsius, warming above industrial age temperatures. But it's actually more than that, right, Tan Sri? Because you've asked me to go and do some research, and I've done so. It's not just about climate change. It's also to do with land use.
Yes.
How we use our land. Our biomes, our forests, our jungles are slowly being depleted. I saw this documentary, Breaking Boundaries, that you are. So if any of you are looking for something to watch on Netflix tonight, do not watch the next episode of that Korean K-drama. Watch Breaking Boundaries just for one night, I ask you. Besok, go back to Korean, okay. Watch Breaking Boundaries. It's only about 1 hour long, 1 hour, 10 minutes, and it explains, for instance, how a lot of the Amazon forest, jungle, tropical jungle in Brazil, turning into savanna.
Yes.
Maknanya tak ada pokok lagi dah. It's green, but there's no pokok anymore. So that's changing land use, fresh water use, chemical pollution. Maybe Tan Sri, you can explain some of these boundaries.
Sure.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I should have a slide on that. It can be cute.
We can go through the slides in a bit, but maybe you want to.
Okay, so it's not just climate change. So first of all, if we say that the planet has to be able to absorb, as Kyrie says, to be resilient enough to absorb all the pressures that human beings are creating, what is the safe space? So a group of scientists actually came together, led by Johan Rockström, who is in the documentary that Kyrie mentioned, and said, here are the 9 things we can measure to be able to tell us whether we are in a safe space or not. And the 9 of the 9 things, only one is climate change. It's also got to do with our land use. It's got to do with fresh water. It's also got to do with ocean acidification. It's also got to do with nitrogen and phosphorus levels. A lot of nitrogen and phosphorus are put into the soil as fertilizers. It's also got to do with novel entities, which are chemicals that are released into the air, and also, other entities. So I think ozone layer is one of them as well. So 9 things you can measure. That's the diagram.
It's there. You can see the 9 things that are measured. So it's not just climate change, as Tan Sri mentioned. You've got biodiversity loss.
Yeah.
So that's loss of fauna and flora. I think a lot of extinct. So in the context of Malaysia, for instance, the Malayan tiger.
It's at risk,
So all these things are either endangered or extinct. You're talking about ozone depletion. You're talking about atmospheric aerosol loading, chemical pollution, ocean acidification. All these things are related. I think what Tan Sri is saying is that these are different systems that sustain the planet. So it's not just the global warming. Or if all these things are out of whack, then we are out of whack.
So you were telling me earlier about, the deodorant use.
Yeah.
So you will see ozone layer and aerosol is still safe. And I think it's very important in this diagram to say that when the first description of the planetary boundaries came out in 2009. Only 3 boundaries were crossed. This is from late last year. We've already crossed 6 boundaries. So it's actually very, very alarming that, we are rapidly destroying a lot of what we call the Earth system resilience, right?
So the cerita yang Tan Sri nak sampaikan tadi, who here is born before 1970 or the 1970s and before? So you're not uncomfortable? I will raise my hand also. Okay. Yeah. So quite a lot of you are born 1970 and before 1970. Do you remember in the mid 1980s? In the mid 1980s, we were told, and those days there was no social media, we were told on TV and schools and in newspapers that there was a hole in the sky. Do you remember? We all remember this. There was a hole in the sky. I remember somebody coming to my school in 1986 or something like that, because they discovered in 85 that there was a hole in a layer called the ozone layer. We all remember this, right? It's crazy. And we know what the ozone layer is. It's a layer that protects us from UV, in particular UVB light from the sunlight. And there was a hole there because, especially because we were releasing certain chemicals into the atmosphere. And one of the big culprits was something called CFC. We all remember this, right? CFC, chlorofluorocarbon. And for us, normal people, the thing that we used, which was CFC, was deodorant. So we had this dilemma of how do we look after our body odor? Because suddenly we cannot use CFC anymore and we had to move to roll-on. And we all did this. And as Tan Sri said, of all the boundaries that we have crossed, ozone depletion is the only one that's reversed. It's the only one that's reversed because we decided not to use spray deodorant anymore.
Yeah.
No, of course, CFC is used in industrial context, but we banned it.
Yeah.
We banned it. But the big question is, Tan Sri, kenapa pada tahun 80-an kita boleh reverse benda tu? We can reverse that. But for all the other boundaries now, there's no sense of panic.
Yeah, that's a really important question because first of all, we could reverse it because every child went to school and learned about the hole in the ozone layer. And therefore, policies were put in place because we were worried about the hole. But unfortunately, human nature, the measure of economic development is still in GDP. We seem to want to continually grow and grow and grow without concern for anything else. So the big elephant in the room is the fossil fuel industry, right? Because it's generating income for countries, but it's doing so much damage. And people are afraid that, the economic development of a country will be affected by the things that you have to now reverse or find alternatives to. So I think it's about political will. It's governance, political will.
Tan Sri, we're going to go later to whether we can reimagine a new economic growth model.
Yeah.
Because our old economic growth model that we still have today is still reliant on GDP. It's still reliant on the utilization of fossil fuels, hydrocarbon. Can we reimagine a new circular, regenerative model of economic growth? We'll go to that later. But before that, I wanted to share some of your wonderful photographs. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about this slide. This is Rosita, who was apparently born on a tree. So what's her story?
So the story is this. How did I stumble onto planetary health, which is a fairly new area of work since 2015? As a humanitarian worker, I have worked in many floods and conflict and so forth. But in the year 2000, I was very affected as an obstetrician and gynecologist at the images of a woman on television, CNN, and CNN plays it over and over again, a woman who had given birth on a tree in Mozambique, and the flood waters below her were raging. There were crocodiles. The Limpopo River had burst, and everything was just chaotic. And there was a South African rescue helicopter bringing her and her baby to safety. This is her baby. Her name is Rosita. When I found her, she was aspiring to be an engineer. But at that point in time, I could not imagine, as a doctor myself, how on earth did she give birth to the baby on a tree? Because babies come up very, very slippery. And how did she cling on? So this shows the love, maternal love, right? And the strength and courage women have in the most dire circumstances. They will protect They will protect what they love, right? And so that memory kind of stayed with me until you want to show the next one. And then in 2019, just before the pandemic broke, I was in Mozambique. Again, after a flood, you will see me here wearing my IFRC jacket. And I was playing with these children, and the British ambassador was there. And I told the midwife, I said, in the year 2000, when I was a younger humanitarian, this image of Rosita. And then she just smiled at me and she pointed to one of the boys and she said, his mother just gave birth on a tree. And I said to myself, what on earth am I doing? I felt at that time I was putting Band-Aid on gaping wounds. I was treating the symptoms. I was not treating the disease, the underlying drivers of why there are severe flooding, severe crises, the lack of social equity of women to health. So that then made me rethink, my purpose, and I went into planetary health.
This is you with
This is Rosamond.
Rosamond. What's her story?
Rosamond is a teacher in London and in Lewisham. And I met her because I was compelled by her story. She fought very, very hard. Her daughter, Ella, who's a very talented young girl, had 22 severe asthmatic attacks in a year and finally died in 2018. The coroner and Deborah and Rosamond worked together because Rosamond said, I'm quite sure the reason why she died was the traffic in the circular road, the South Circular Road, was extremely heavy and the pollution was so bad. And the coroner agreed, looking at the data of the indices, and she remains the only person in the world whose death certificate was changed from asthma to toxic air pollution. Because of this, Rosamond lobbies till today very, very hard to make sure that air quality in London and the rest of the world is improved because she doesn't want other children to die like Ella. And I'm quite sure many children have died because of toxic air pollution, not just in London. It's just that the bottom line is in medical education, I graduated in 86. I was not taught about climate change or pollution and health. Today, only 15% of medical curriculum has that. So we need a revolution in how we teach doctors because doctors don't recognize that and will not put pollution as a cause of death. So you can't even change policies. But her death led to changes in policies in London. Mayor Sadiq Khan introduced low emission zone and ultra low emission zones. As a result, the reduction in what we call PMI 2.5, the particles in the air, has drastically reduced, not just of that, but also nitrous oxide and other harmful gases in the air. And therefore, the quality of air is much better.
So just for the benefit of those of you who may not know what Tan Sri Jamila referred to just now. So Sadiq Khan is the mayor of London. And in order to combat air pollution, he's made it quite expensive for people to drive into the city or certain zones within the city. So he's created these zones, LEZ and ULEZ, low emission zones, so that you either don't drive in, you use public transport, or you have to pay quite a high premium for doing that. Of course, the big problem there, Tan Sri, is that he initially came across huge political opposition.
Yeah.
And that led to the loss of a by-election,
Yes.
I think a year ago.
Yes.
In UK for Sadiq's party. Sadiq is from Labour.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to answer because I can imagine if government, I'm trying to remember my government days, right? If I tried to do an ultra low emission zone in KL, I think I'd be voted out of office. I mean, I've been voted out of office already, so it's okay. But I mean, I'll be voted out of office again. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Sadiq took the gamble because he believes in it, right? Rosamond is very powerful as an advocate. If you think I'm strong, she's like 100 times stronger than me. So she can really get on your nerves and really, she'll sit in front of the mayor's office every day. But he was convinced, Rosamond, many mothers many women, many scientists, the WHO, people like me, all stood behind Sadiq Khan and said, "You're doing the right thing." And the communication, the lobbying by so-called real advocates, he won the election.
Yeah.
So it shows that even if it's an unpopular policy, because it is life-saving, it's women who mobilized and really voiced their concerns for future generations.
Thank you. Tan Sri, I want to just take you up on Rosamond's case, because this is a clear case where all these boundaries are being pushed. In this case, air pollution, and it's having an impact on people's health. Because I want to make the link now between planetary health and your physical health.
Yeah.
Because I think it's very important that human beings are incentivized to work for the planet,
Yes.
and they're incentivized when it affects their own health. If it doesn't, then maybe they think it's something that is far away, tragedy on the horizon, commons, nothing to do with me. I'm just interested in my own personal health and my own personal family. Tan Sri, apart from Rosamond's case, you told me this was something really, really interesting, and I wanted you to share with everyone so climate change, global warming. So I have two sisters, Kak Mona. My second sister, Kak Ana, she now lives in Medina. So she's migrated to Saudi Arabia. And she told me it was the hottest summer. She migrated recently only, so she's only had one summer there. But her husband, who's been living there for the longest time, said it's the hottest summer that they've had. And we've heard of our Jemaah Haji recently, not from Malaysia, but from other countries passing away. So that's climate change, right? That's 100% global warming.
Waves, yeah.
But you are also telling me that there's a increased incidence of urinary tract infection and kidney stones amongst fishermen in Terengganu.
Yeah. It's not just Terengganu, around the world. I think, heat waves are very insidious in Malaysia because why? We're used to the heat. So bila panas lebih sikit, we say, okay, it's just a bit hotter today, but you don't realize that even a slight fluctuation in temperature on the rise has actually impacts on your health. So what happens is that when you want to talk about climate change to farmers and fishermen, you don't talk to them, so what do you think about 1.5, right? You ask them, how do you feel? And you'll find that people, my son is a diver, so he stays on the islands many months, and I asked him to ask questions, and they were saying, yes, they're always falling sick nowadays, my friend had batu karang, so he's telling me all these stories about the people who go out to sea. So which this is anecdotal, it has to be really studied.
Yep.
But we do know, for example, those exposed to the sun, people who are construction workers, who are farmers, they have higher incidences of infection because they are dehydrated. They drink the same amount despite the fact the temperature increases, and heat waves are associated with so many problems in health, not just those infections, but also cardiovascular diseases, sudden heart attacks, also shown to cause miscarriages and premature birth. So there's a lot of health impacts of heat waves, and pollution is even worse. Pollution is not just about respiratory illness; it's also cardiovascular disease, early onset of Alzheimer's and neurological disorders, infertility. The whole works.
Tan Sri, since you spoke about pollution, I wanted to just maybe have a discussion and then get everyone to think about pollution. When we talk about pollution, normally it's about things that we can see.
Yeah.
That's why we call it pencemaran. You can see it. Pencemaran alam sekitar, pencemaran udara. You can see the black smoke and things like that. But in fact, there is emerging pollution that is difficult for us to detect. And one of the biggest high-risk areas, which falls into global boundaries because you're talking about the oceans, is microplastics, especially microplastics in water supply. Can you tell us a little bit about microplastics? Because I'm told Malaysia is not doing well at all.
So Malaysia at the moment is the highest per person ingester or consumer of microplastics, all of us. right?
And it's in baby's feces.
It's in baby's feces, it crosses placental tissue, it's in breast milk, it's also in male testicular tissue. That's how deep it's gone. Now, microplastics happen because we are using so many of the single-use plastics. They get to the ocean, they're ingested by fish. They're also evaporating now. You know, in 1 liter of water, you will have up to 250,000 nanoparticles of microplastic. It's in the air, it's in the cloud. So we're also breathing in microplastics. Now, microplastics causes something called neuroendocrine disorders, and that includes a range of things from cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, cancer, you name it. So, you know,
Alzheimer's as well?
yes, neurological disorders. And I think that I always joke that when I die, you can make a credit card out of me, all right? Because there's enough plastic in me probably to produce one. But it's not a joke. It's really, you know, it's quite serious. And the problem is, how do you treat microplastics? You can't. So what we need to do now is prevent. So you will see, and I'm glad that you did the same today. I never drink from a plastic water bottle. So I think the first thing you do is when you're organizing things to say to the organizer, we do not want any plastic, do not any single-use plastic, so that, you know, we drive a message. All of us have to play this role, right? And then the other thing, if I may, Kyrie, is that food waste, right? This is really alarming. 40% of food waste, which means that the 40% of the food you buy and put in the fridge or whatever is thrown away. This is national data and global data. Out of this, 30 to 40% that arrives at the landfill are actually still edible. And if you rescue that food, you can feed 12 million Malaysians 3 meals a day. So it's not just about food waste, it's also about the food that goes to the landfills produce methane and CO2 and everything else. So again, you're increasing global warming, you're just damaging the planet just by being wasteful in food.
Tan Sri, when it comes to food and waste, a lot of the waste is by design because we don't design products and things like that so that it can be reused or regenerated. So for instance, single plastic, minum lepas tu campak habis lah, that becomes waste. Can you talk us through this concept of designing products and services so that they are more circular in nature? I know there's a heightened version of this, which is donut economics, but maybe on a circular basis. What can we do in our daily lives to make sure that it's more circular?
Okay. Before that, I just maybe want to quiz the crowd. How many percent of plastics, plastic manufacturers and government will say, it's okay, you got plastics, we will recycle. How many percent of plastics actually recycled?
Anyone know this? You can raise your hand. How many percent of plastics
give it a
are
guess.
recycled? 10, 20%? 5%? 5%?
No, lagi.
20%? 20%. There you go.
It's less than 9%, right, globally. So it's very, very small, So all this so-called, this is recyclable. It's actually not recycled. So it's a problem in design. So when you talk about circular economics, there are many examples, right? So one easy example is clothing. That's another big pollutant because a lot of polyester clothing has plastic, right? So in a circular economy, in Sweden, for example, they have even established repair warehouses. So nobody throws anything. Things are brought there, they're repaired, they're reused, they're distributed. So Hari Raya, for example, everybody wants baju Melayu yang baru, baju baru. Maybe what you can do is start sharing. Maybe this year, find somebody your size and exchange so that you have a new baju. That is an example of being circular, right? The other thing is...
So Tan Sri, they're clapping because they know that I was an ambassador for Baju Melayu this year.
Yeah.
So they're telling me not to be ambassador anymore.
The other thing is, our traditional practices, right? How do you wrap things? When you order something from Shopee, it comes like in 6 layers of plastic. Right? If we actually all stood and wrote a petition, Persewa writes a petition to to Shopee and Lazada and others to say, we do not want your things to be wrapped in plastic. This happened with Amazon, and therefore Amazon only packs in boxes, and their packing doesn't have a lot of plastic. And what they also do is they will say, can you take this box if you don't mind all your shipments to be done at one sitting, so that you don't have to ship so many times and your transport cost and your fossil fuel use is reduced. Dulu kita banyak pakai tingkat sia, right? Why don't we bring that back? Why don't we bring back bungkus dalam daun pisang, wrapping the vegetables in banana leaves? It's all being done now in Indonesia, in Thailand, and so forth. How do we improve our bioeconomic industries, making new packaging from tapioca and so forth? We have the potential in Malaysia.
Tan Sri, that brings me to, there's a nice segue to bring me, because you mentioned Persiwa's role, and the title of this talk is Women and Planetary Health. And I wanted to narrow down on what women can do specifically for planetary health. But before we talk about what women can do, I also wanted, and Tan Sri alluded to this just now, about the disproportionate impact of degradation of planetary health on women. I mean, all human beings are affected by climate change, by changes in or deterioration in planetary health. But Tan Sri told me that there's a disproportionate impact on women and families and children, where women are at the center of families and children. Why are women, Tan Sri, disproportionately affected by decrease or degradation in planetary health?
Well, first of all, if there are disasters and climate-related disasters now on the rise, the gap between in the US, they did this interesting study, the gap between disasters that have an economic impact of 1 billion or more was 76 years on average. Until recently, it's become 25 years. So it means they're happening more and more frequently, the major disasters. Now, when big disasters happen, particularly flooding and so forth, women are the ones most vulnerable, because they are sometimes swept away because some of them don't know how to swim and so forth. This happened in the tsunami, but tsunami is of course not climate related. Also because women will always protect their children first. They'll make sure the children are safe before they are safe, so they will be affected. Women will eat last in many households, and therefore when there's climate change impacts on food security, women have the last say. Women are also out there as a working force. They are the majority of small farmers. They are also the ones who do quite a lot of outdoor work. So, they get the impacts of heat and so forth. And finally, women, the direct impact on women's reproductive health, as I've mentioned before, is clear, right? Miscarriages, premature labor, all sorts of problems that women actually have. So while they are disproportionately affected, they're also the real problem solvers, because women, Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Prize, did that by just planting trees. They threatened her with all sorts of things. They called her a tree hugger and all that, but she planted millions of trees and it created a green revolution in Kenya. It was one woman, just going out there to do this. And I know of many stories where women have really stood up to say, this is how we protect our community, we green our community, we will all be safer.
Tan Sri, the other thing is, my observation about the role of women is that a lot of the solutions that we need are community-based solutions.
Right.
And women are at the center of driving changes in communities.
Yeah.
Of course, if you look at the basic community level dekat Malaysia ni is the kampung level lah.
Yes.
So ketua kampung tu disproportionately male, tapi yang buat kerja ni semua wanita lah. We all know this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jangan lupa saya punya comeback 2026 nanti. Don't forget. No, because I know this. Because, my old party, UMNO, bila kita ada mesyuarat cawangan, yang datang semua wanita je.
Yes.
Datang semua wanita. Laki semua isap okok kat luar. Kan? Okay. Anyway, so a lot of the solutions are community-based. And I wanted to talk about this because we have a lot of big national documents. National Energy Transition Roadmap, Net Zero 2050. So by 2050 ni kononnya Malaysia, not kononnya lah, but our aspiration is that we are net zero. our carbon emission is offset by mitigation and adaptation measures so that we are net zero by 2050. But let's face it, Tan Sri, a lot of these things need to happen on the ground in communities.
Yep.
Kita cakap aja at the national level, but at the end of the day, if the communities are not doing it at the kampung level, at the housing estate level, then it's not going to work.
Absolutely. And I think change happens when communities mobilize, right? I think, women have such an important role, not just in terms of what they can do, but also what they can influence. So the influence obviously will be on their children. Women will talk to their children, educate their children, but also talk to their husbands. I remember in one talk that I gave, I talked about conflict and working in Afghanistan, and I worked during the time of Taliban. And I said, I was so fortunate being a woman because I could go into the homes of these people. And whether you're Taliban or not, when your wife speaks to you, you listen. So,
Even the Taliban, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I think that, women have a real distinct role. And I think it starts from home, right? If through organizations like Persewa, we go down to communities, educate them on how harmful it is, some of the things they're doing, how they move towards a much more sustainable lifestyle. Because the challenge, though, people will say, sustainability ni untuk orang kaya. Not really. It's about going back to basics, going back to, for example, what diet you give your children to eat. If you can cut down your meat intake, because agriculture, particularly livestock agriculture, is one of the biggest causes of degradation of forests. And, if we can say start with meatless Mondays, meatless Fridays, whatever.
Tough.
Yeah. I know. So I think, but it's important because, there's just not enough water left in future to sustain these farms, these large farms, right? If you have, grazing animals, that's why orang kata ayam kampung, kambing yang you don't breed in large, what do you call it? Feedlots, right? So it's much healthier than those you give. And, the things that they give them to eat, you have to remember that when you want to mass produce meat, it's pumped with antibiotics. That causes another problem of antimicrobial resistance in the future, which is estimated to kill about 10 million people by 2050. So there's a lot of harm in the choices that we make, even with food.
Tazia, I want to bring the discussion to how Malaysia is doing, because we speak about the global boundaries in climate change, in air pollution, in biomes, biodiversity, and things like that. Are we doing okay, Malaysia? Because we should be blessed, right? God has blessed this country as a carbon sink, supposedly. Carbon sink meaning that we have tropical jungle, and that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So we are one of the biggest carbon sinks in the world. So surely we are not the problem, right? We're doing well, right?
So let's go back to science and evidence, right? So this diagrams that you see on the slides comes from something called the University of Leeds Good Life Index. What they have measured is they look at the inner circle, and this is to do with donor economics. The inner circle is what you call social foundations, basically our sustainable development goals. The outer circle in green is your ecological ceiling, the planetary boundaries that I mentioned earlier. Now this research showed, I just put 3 countries to compare, Malaysia, United States and Vietnam.
Kalau merah tu tak best lah.
Merah tak best. Merah is not good. So Malaysia has actually crossed about 7 boundaries. So it's not really good. And yet on the social front, we're not doing brilliant. I mean, it's better than many countries. But so we're almost like US, in sense of, our pollution per capita, right? But if you look at on the left, extreme left, Vietnam, which is an emerging economy, you will see that, okay, on the social side, maybe they also have some gaps. Not much more than Malaysia, but they're doing quite well on their planetary boundaries. So what we need to do now, and when I engage with the Vietnamese government, I tell them what is their number one worry. They tell me it's climate change, and I told them no, it's beyond climate change. You need to look at this. So in developing their economies in the future, they need to think about how it's going to impact. So I always say that why can't we have this aspiration? China is the supply chain leader in the world. ASEAN is the sustainable supply chain leader of the world. So that mindset shift needs to happen. Therefore, economic development has to take a different role, because the EU, the US, and others will put on very strict measures and sanctions for unsustainable goods. So it's better for us to be ready.
So the data is showing that in terms of the environmental ceilings and the planetary boundaries, Vietnam is doing better than us.
Yes.
Are you sure? The communist country, di mana data tak transparent kan?
No.
No, I'm joking. So that's something of concern, which brings me to the broader point, Tan Sri, because I think you just ended your last intervention by saying that we have to start thinking about new aspirations as a nation. That's so difficult, Tan Sri, because we are used to a very material aspiration in Malaysia, which is jobs, economic growth almost at all costs, subsidies. So we have low cost of living, subsidy for everything from petrol to diesel to all these things, bringing in factories and not really, and sometimes compromising on environmental standards. Is there a different vision of economic development that can change our view of how we measure progress in Malaysia?
So a number of ways that we can look at this. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, that we are looking at GDP as our measure. Some countries have started to turn away from GDP because having a high GDP doesn't necessarily guarantee a happy country, right? Look at the US, one of the highest GDPs, they're not very happy people. Other developed nations as well. So countries like, for example, Bhutan, you would have heard, has done away with GDP and looked at happiness index. Dubai is now looking at happiness as well. They even have a minister of happiness. Costa Rica.
That's a good job. I don't mind doing that.
Yeah.
Minister of Happiness.
Costa Rica, for example, is divested in military and invested it in environment. As a result, they had economic growth from tourism and so forth. Finland has also done away with GDP measurements. So what they're looking now is at well-being economics. So this includes concepts like donut economics, which is regenerative economics and so forth. How do you ensure economic development, but at the same time, most importantly, your citizens are happy? And
Yeah. And then we just recorded an episode of our podcast yesterday, and Sharel and I were reflecting on Merdeka. And, happiness is ingrained in the DNA of our country, because the standout line of our national anthem is that God has graced us with happiness. Rahmat bahagia Tuhan kurniakan. I don't know why the author of the national anthem, and of course Tengku Abdul Rahman, who approved it, chose that. He was the happiest prime minister, but he narrowed it in that. It was the line before, of course, speaks about progress and speaks about unity, but what God has graced us with is happiness.
Yes.
So it's definitely ingrained in us, so that we aspire towards something a bit more than just material development. But coming back to this donut economics, Tan Sri, I want you to share with everyone. You've been doing some work with Ipoh, apparently.
Yeah.
So Ipoh has embraced this new form of development. So Ipoh, dia tak nak kejar sangat just GDP, just the money, so to speak, but something a bit more sustainable, something a bit more regenerative. Can you explain and share with us what you've been doing in Ipoh?
So we managed to work with the Ipoh municipality to say, can we pilot a donut economic model in Ipoh? Donut economics basically is around these two boundaries that I mentioned, the social foundations and the ecological ceiling. So how do you regenerate economy in Ipoh, make it a city that people want to live in, people are happy, that is not going to damage the planet as well? So I give you some examples. We have looked at, with the municipality, 5 disused mines and regenerated the forests around the mines, and they become new ecotourism sites, and really built the new economy based on ecotourism from what was abandoned land. So this is why it's called regenerative. It's not just circular, but you regenerate nature and you regenerate the planet as well. For example, the TC in Ipoh is completely solarized in terms of energy. The market in Ipoh, which is quite big and famous, is harvesting rainwater to make sure that they clean the market using rainwater. So really looking at natural systems. So it lowers the cost to the government, but also brings a lot of benefit to the planet. So these are just some examples. We're going to expand further, looking at how communities can become stronger and more resilient in preparing for disasters. How do we also look at community happiness and cohesion? Because this is very important as part of the whole donor economic model. And I'm very pleased to share that Ipoh is the first city in Asia that has embraced this. And I chose Ipoh as the pilot because it is the same size and same population as Amsterdam, which was the first which was the first donut city to embrace donor economics. And Ipoh just has been awarded now the UN Habitat Scroll of Honor, which the mayor will go and pick up in November.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm going to open up to the floor in just a second. But so while you get ready and while the team gets ready with the microphones for everyone to come in. But before we open up, I just wanted to just extend that a little bit to also share about what other countries are doing and reimagining their future. So maybe for Malaysia ni kita tak rasa sangat sebab these changes that are happening, it's existential in a sense that it will affect us, maybe if not us, but our children and our grandchildren, but not in the clear, in the immediate term. Yes, we have droughts. Yes, we have famine. Yes, we have floods, but it's not existential in a sense that it will make us extinct or our country extinct. But for some countries, and some countries, Kamuna, who are part of your PERSEWA network, your Pan-Pacific network, this is a existential problem. Tan Sri was telling me that countries in the Pacific, Kiribati and all these other countries, they're starting to think about how to define a country without an island. Because satu hari nanti dia tak ada island lah. So can they have a IC but be somewhere else and still be the people of Kiribati? That's happening, right?
Yeah. I think that, first of all, many of the Pacific islands will be underwater by 2100. And including Maldives.
Maldives is gone.
Yeah, and therefore, they are now starting to move their historical artifacts to Fiji and New Zealand. They're buying land, but what will they become? What citizens will they be? Because if the island is no more, how do you define citizenship? So the leader of Tuvalu and Kiribati are looking at digital identity. So can you still be a Kiribati or a Tuvaluan using digital identity? So these are the things that we have to think about in the future. But you mentioned about what are countries doing now to address this. I'll give you some really nice examples. I mentioned Costa Rica, which I think is a role model for us because they divested in the military. They really focus on environment.
I just wanted to stress that. Tan Sri just said Costa Rica divested military. Costa Rica doesn't have an army.
Yeah.
They've decided, we're not going to have an army and spend billions of dollars on maintaining a standing army.
Yeah.
They just said that, we are going to dedicate our resources for other things.
Yeah. And now is a happy nation. It's constantly in the top 5 of the happiest nations in the world. It's a beautiful country. People want to go there. And their tourism is not based on large scale hotels. It's like macam kita punya homestay. Very private, community-based, staying, small hotels. Second is Singapore. Let's look at Singapore. Singapore, for example, has built a virtual city of Singapore. And what they're doing now is using AI and other things to see how do they cool the island down. So how do you reduce heat islands? So what parts of Singapore can you put greenery in? What buildings can you choose? So they're really looking at it using AI and so forth, so that the city becomes more livable. Singapore is also under severe threat of seawater rise. So they're looking also at what kind of seawalls do they have to build and so forth. Countries like Portugal ran the country for, I believe it was 1 week with only renewable energy. So they are quite confident now. They can switch and pivot to renewable energy very, very quickly. There are many other countries in the Latin American region that have, really taken very hard stand on renewable energy, very firm on fossil fuel lobbies and so forth. I think a lot of the stories are actually very much also at community level, where, for example, in Bangladesh, they build microgrids so that everyone has access to energy, but without flooding the main, sort of central grid or batteries, but really looking at micro projects. So the answer for Malaysia is not big things. It's actually doing things very much at community level, in my opinion. It has to be, making sure that Rembau has this sustainable energy supply.
Don't look at me, Tan Sri. I'm
From 2026.
Okay,
yeah.
inshallah.
But so really looking at these things. I mean, you talked about desertification of the Brazilian Amazon. So Lake Taiping was almost dry. My husband is from Sungai Pahang, and we were in Pahang one day, and it's dry. You can walk across Sungai Pahang. Who would ever think that could be happening in our lifetime, right? So
I know there's a lot of doom and gloom later now, but we will end later when we conclude after the Q&A with some happy thoughts and some positive thoughts. But I want to open up for a bit of Q&A. We have time for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have Tan Sri with the concluding remarks, and we'll have a bit of refreshments after that. So can we have some questions about what we've been discussing today? Nak cakap pasal apa? Planetary boundaries, climate change, community action, what women groups can do, or what community groups can do. Yes, please. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Is there a microphone, please? Thank you. Can we have our volunteers bring the microphone? Thank you. Terima kasih. Just introduce your name and where you're from and the question.
Good evening. I'm Rita. I'd like to, specifically, of course, before that, only an eminent, outspoken, active leadership like you could be expelled. So please continue your journey towards being outspoken and have dissent here.
If I continue to do that, I'll continue to be expelled.
Of course, I'm talking about balance.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I have two questions. I was listening, and I was, intently listening, especially, doctor. I was wondering what additional policies and practices can government organizations implement to ensure that women meaningfully participate in this climate change action. I'm talking also at the community level.
Yeah.
In addition, coming volunteering and etc. What specific measures, incentives that can be given? Because this is very important. Like what, as you mentioned, there are, like in certain countries, you have microcredits, you have grants given to the community level. Like, we even have a resident association in our own community, and I'm one of them. We are pushing for environment awareness programs, but incentives are so difficult to come by. So we think that it should go down to that level, not just speaking. I mean, at the levels of the parliament and the governments. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great question. Yeah, thank you, Rita. Maybe we'll take a couple more, and then I'll note it down, and then Tan Sri can sort of answer 2 or 3 questions, a batch of questions. Yes, Mrs. Fabini.
My name is Khairuddin. I'm from Rawang. One question. I would like to have an input on how effective the COP meetings has been going on, because I'm sure some of you have been going on.
Yeah.
Now we're going there. I would like to relate it to the Western hypocrisy that we have seen going on today. And COP28 is only going to be successful if the Westerners who are in the advanced country today do away with the hypocrisy that we have been seeing today. Case for example, the Gaza genocide, 10 months. They say we are the human rights, Western values and all that, but they're the one who's letting these people die just like that. So the pessimistic element in me says all this is BS, because if we don't handle the Western hypocrisies that we see, loudly, hear loudly, and see blind, openly in our eyes, there'll be never any hope for any solution for what we're looking at, the climate change that we have today. Just some simple input.
Thank you. Wonderful question. Yes, over here. Sydney? Okay.
I'm very happy that we are talking about environmental matters today. It's very much close to my heart. And this plastic issue is really something that bothers me endlessly. When I go shopping, I will always carry my own bags and my baskets and things. And I find this is so easy. People should just do it. And when I go to shops and, the people immediately take a plastic bag and want to wrap my things in plastic, I will tell them and teach them. I say, don't do that, but they don't listen. I think if we really want to change that, cannot the government step in and just disallow the use of plastic?
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise you will never control that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Tan Sri, maybe we want to take a stab at the questions. Just to recap, Rita has mentioned about
plastics.
Can there be incentives for action, especially on the ground? What sort of incentives would you, if you were still advising the government, recommend and design during the budget for this community action? Cik Khairuddin, wonderful question about Western hypocrisy, especially at COP, and Mrs. Fabini about on plastic use.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. There needs to be a policy. I think it's going to be announced as a policy-wide ban on single-use plastic. But then it was followed by a statement. Then the implementation, who's going to implement? It has to be at municipal level. It doesn't work like that. If you want to have a ban, it has to be a nationwide ban, and everyone is responsible. So a lot of voices now being raised. In November in Busan, there will be the plastics treaty negotiations. So it's important that Malaysia goes there strong. We are giving a lot of inputs to the ministry. It's quite strong language to say that ministry has to step up and really support this. But I think it's also about behaviors, right? You want it. Ultimately, you can create all sorts of policies, but if at community level and individual level you don't change, then that's going to be a problem. So one thing that's happening, and we haven't mentioned yet, is a national planetary health action plan is being developed right now. It's the first in the world. Now, it ties to the question that Rita asked, how do you get these policies to be strengthened? Malaysia is not short of policies, but the policies are so uncoordinated. So the energy policy doesn't talk to the water policy. This policy doesn't talk to the other policy. And, I put up that diagram up there because it shows the Sustainable Development Goals. We all signed up for the Sustainable Development Goals. But what happens is it's siloed. So health is, goal 3, only Ministry of Health. On gender, it's only one ministry. But everything is connected. So having a planetary health framework, putting it at the bottom, putting the planetary boundaries, helps the SDGs to make more sense. And this is what we're trying to push. So the strong policies are needed, but at the end of the day, implementation has to be assured. And third is, can people and community be influenced to change their behaviors? Because if we don't, it's easy to point fingers at others, but if we don't change our behaviors, nothing will happen.
But Tan Sri, I wanted to jump in on that point. About this use of plastic. We asked the municipal council, PBT to implement it, right? And I remember some are doing well.
Yeah.
Some don't want to do it. Some states are really driving it, saying that we don't want it, Melaka and all this kan. Tapi ada states yang kata leceh, and then the peniaga kecil, the penjaja complain, kalau kita tak ada plastik, tak ada siapa beli, and then the consumers marah, especially at Pasar Malam and Pasar Ramadan and all that. So we can talk here. I mean, maybe in KL context, we are ready for the adaptation, but let's face it, on the ground, susah.
This is where women's groups are important, right? Educating people and other women. Who does the most shopping for the household? It's women, right? If women say, no, but I don't want this, it is how do you create a behavioral shift? Because if maybe they don't understand the impact of plastic on their health, on their children's health. We are getting to be an infertile country. The infertility rate is very, very high. By 2040, we will not meet our replacement rate, which means that we will not have enough Malaysians to support the economy. We have to import workers, and yet we are so nasty to migrants, right? So I think it's all linked. How do we make sure that we educate people that this is very important? And to do that, we have to keep it simple. We have to keep it close to their heart. In faith, I brought together faith leaders recently. I brought rabbis, imams, priests, everyone together. And everyone agreed that in their faith, the common value they have is protection of humanity. And if you know that if you don't behave this way, you're not going to protect each other, our responsibility to each other. So it's going back to our faith, our spirituality, or being a decent human being. So how do you get those values in? It's rooted in education, early education. How do you get young children to appreciate this? I don't understand why parents condone children throwing trash all over the place. If you as a parent don't correct them, then there's no way they're going to grow up to understand the importance of that. So it's a very complex issue. I totally agree with you, Khairi, but I'll give you an example. I work at Sunway University. It's a zero plastic waste, zero single plastic use. Vendors mula-mula marah, right? But we showed them the value of it, and we have to explain to the students and the faculties that you may have to pay a little bit more for biodegradable packaging. But it's now gone on and people don't complain anymore because they accept it as a norm. So how do you return to the norms? Now, on the women's groups, I think women's groups are so important, and the inclusion of women in the decision making is very important. But I feel in Malaysia it's quite tokenistic at the moment. How do we elevate this to a higher level? Now, I think one of the things we can do, for example, the Climate Change Act is being developed and they're doing a consultative process. Make sure that you have women on the consultations. Women have to be present. You have to bang the table if you have to, or shout or whatever it is. But there's also, good cop, bad cop lah. Some have to do that. Some have to be the diplomats, right? I think that women's views are extremely important, and we should hold our government accountable because they say that women should be included, then they should be included. So, I think gatherings like this are important to raise awareness, but the follow-up is going to be very important. On the question on COPs, first of all, there are many COPs. There's COP, Climate COP, and there's also Biodiversity COP. Let me talk about Biodiversity COP. Biodiversity COP is a very successful COP because that's where the 30-30 agenda was adopted, and also where we are able now to reverse the ozone depletion. So I think there are some COPs that are really, really important. Now, with the climate COP, it's extremely difficult because you are right. The polluters are mainly the West, and the ones who are suffering are coming from the global South. And therefore, the right now, the loss and damage fund that is being demanded is that the countries who are rich must now pay compensation to the countries that are poor. And of course, they're not doing it. Part of the problem, and I may be very blunt and honest here, most of the people who go are fossil fuel lobbyists who will tell the government, don't do this because, it will impact their fossil fuel business. So unless we move away from fossil fuel businesses, unless the governments are willing to tax polluters, you will never be able to meet the loss and damage fund. We need trillions, but we are not getting that amount. Yes, there's hypocrisy, but it does not also mean we as Malaysia, the non-Western, must not do our part to reduce our footprint and to reduce our plastic and to reduce our impact on the planet. Kita tak boleh marah ke orang ni, kita tak boleh buat lah sebab bukan salah kita semua. Actually, semua orang bersalah. Kan, semua orang bersalah. All of us drove one car each or whatever it is to come here. right? Not many people took public transport. So I think we are all responsible, ultimately. We all accept that there's plastic on our table. We don't stand up and say that this is not acceptable. So start with me first, my family, my community, my circle of influence, who I can influence, my workplace. Then we can do that. And the hypocrisy will always exist. And intergovernmental process ni memang complicated. Sebab banyak division. You have G20, G7, G77, segala-galanya. And, member states always have personal interest. They come in with the interest of their country. So they don't look at it from the interest of the world, right? So how do we change that? Who is changing that? Young people. Young people have taken countries to court. Women, I don't know if you read this news, the women of Switzerland took their country to court and won for the lack of action on climate change. The women of Switzerland took their country to court, right, and won. So I don't know what they're going to have to do now to address this. But we have to take action, right?
Yeah, I think a wonderful answer that as we do call out hypocrisy at a global level, it doesn't excuse us from not doing things in our own backyard. But I think that hypocrisy question from Cik Khairuddin is important. I mean, take for instance, in the first 2 days of the year, the average British person emits more carbon emission than the average person in the Republic of Congo for the entire year.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is. In 2 days, the average British person emits more carbon than in an entire year.
And I'll give you another data point which depresses me, right? The bombings of Gaza has emitted more than the aviation industry just several months ago. And the majority of that was actually because of the jets flying in using US dollars, right? So I think war is a real emitter and is horrible, right? And you're absolutely right. Hypocrisy, lack of solidarity in this world. Let's not just blame the West. Let's also look at the Muslim world as well.
Yeah.
So I think we are in such a terrible situation right now, but we cannot be pessimists because in every crisis there's an opportunity to do better, right? We all have to come together and work together and find the solutions together. So I think it's there. We have enough intelligence, equipment, tools, everything to solve the problems of the world today. We have everything we need. It's now a matter of political will. It's a matter of community pressure coming from everyone, and I think people power is the most powerful thing in the world.
We're going to do one last round of questions, 3 questions, and then we're going to conclude a wonderful session with Tan Sri Jamila. So I'm going to open it up once more for 3 questions from the floor. Gentleman who is already stood up. Can we have the microphone here from our volunteer? Thank you. And a couple more after this to wrap things up. Yes, sir.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Saya Tash. Tahun 1977 kita telah beritahu bahawa kita akan kehilangan banyak spesies. Dan pada tahun 2020 kita kehilangan badak Sumatera. Dan 75 tahun akan datang kita akan kehilangan 1/4 daripada biodi yang ada di Malaysia. Macam mana kita nak solve problem ni?
Yeah.
Terima kasih. Can we get the other question?
Yeah.
And then kita kumpulkan 2 lagi soalan. 2 more questions. Yes. At the back there.
A lot of hands behind there.
Yeah.
And one here.
Very good afternoon. My name is Sandra. I'm with Kiwanis Malaysia.
Okay.
We work with youth and children all the time. Okay, we know that the last few years when we had COVID, the world managed to heal itself, right? And now everyone is out traveling. Economies are all up full steam. So when we talk about less impactful pollution, so we would have a measure of which components contribute the most to all this which is going to be the end of the humankind eventually, right? We are actually doing it to ourselves. So this problem is not only Malaysia, it's global. So how or what can we do, which are the major impact components which we should focus on to put a stop? You know, minor components may not have an impact, but what are the major components of lifestyle change, economic change, or the whole way human exists, that's such that we can continue to exist on planet Earth?
Thank you. Wonderful question. And last one at the back there.
Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum. My name is Rowena. Thank you very much for a very, very insightful talk. I've learned a lot, made a lot of notes. My question is actually quite specific about the electric car industry. So electric vehicles, they were introduced to try and stop us using fossil fuels, to lessen the use of fossil fuels, but we now have a new problem with batteries. Batteries can't be, I think they can't be disposed, or it's very difficult to get rid of the batteries. And now, in the UK at least, electric vehicles are sort of seen to have failed to some extent. So I suppose my question is on technology. So we need technology to try and continue using our lives. We need to develop in some ways, but it's not able to cope with, technology is not able to cope with our needs and demands. And so how can we try to find technology that is sustainable? So looking at the electric car industry as an example of one that has maybe not done as well as we thought, what can we do better in the future? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
So maybe we start with Cik Taj punya soalan tadi berkenaan dengan biodiversity.
Yeah, biodiversity loss is happening at about 1 to 1.5% per day, which means hundreds of species per day. Yang Tuan sebutkan tu memang very important, but you know what is the most worrying loss we are having is actually insects. We're losing a lot of insects per day, and insects are vital to pollination. So as a result, you may not get some of the plants growing. We will have loss of species because of that biodiversity loss. How do you stop it? Again, the COP, biodiversity COP is very important, and there is a strategy in the last biodiversity COP Montreal looking at can we reduce 30% loss by 2030. So I think a lot of the member states have signed up to that. In Malaysia, it's very complicated. It's about you have state and then you have federal law. So, if we really want to address climate change and biodiversity law, we have no choice but to really sit down and look at how you synergize these things, because there's no point having a federal law and at state level, they say, it's up to me what I do with the forest and so forth. So this is the elephant in the room as well, which is very, very difficult. One thing that you can do is stop using pesticides. I keep telling KKM, stop doing fogging, because you not only kill dengue, you punya virus, mosquito, you kill every other insect that's there as well. So how do you build more community awareness on, the risk of dengue, making sure people, takkanlah you tak boleh even examine your own compound to look whether there's water containers that are, potential breeding grounds and so forth. So, why are you waving? Okay, so that's one. Now on the question about what are the most important things, number one is fossil fuel industry. They're the main culprits in CO2 emissions, and their lifestyle, the life chain of fossil fuel is not just at petrol level or fossil fuels, but also right down to plastics, right? Because you must remember that plastics are also from fossil fuels. How do we really push for them to start looking at greener energy, making sure that we go to renewables? How do you stop proliferation? Whatever is now happening, we cannot say you cannot stop immediately. No, you can't, because you still need energy. There are some countries that don't even have energy. You have to address energy poverty. But what we can do is stop proliferating. Don't go and explore new areas. Use whatever you have while rapidly scaling up technology so that you can go into renewables very quickly. The second largest is actually agriculture. If you reduce your meat intake, there's less demand in meat, you will actually restore forests, because that's the main culprit in agriculture. The other thing, of course, is going from mass agriculture to much more smaller agriculture, community-based agriculture that is more sustainable. And then number 4 probably is aviation and travel and transportation and so forth. So rethinking our transportation. I'm guilty because I fly quite a bit because of my work. But what I do is I always offset. Now, offsetting is a very bad way to deal with the problem. But at least I feel that hopefully if there are a few more trees planted in this world, there's CO2 absorption. But we have to rethink, and the sustainable fuel has to come in now. Our airlines are now looking at how they look at biofuel that will be able to be used, which means that there has to be a premium cost to flights. So we have to be able to accept that things will cost more if we want to be able to survive longer. So that's that's what we have to do. The last question, Rowena, is this. There's actually, interestingly, I actually am on the Global Future Council for the World Economic Forum on responsible resource use. And we're coming up with a report from the Global Battery Alliance to look at how do you have circularity of batteries itself. And I think that's the way forward, to look at how you recycle the material in batteries. At the moment, the worry with electric vehicles is that the extraction of some of these minerals can have human rights violations and other planetary damage because it may encroach onto indigenous lands and so forth. But if you look at the energy saving, per se, is actually it's clear. It's clean. So the next step, I think, in this is using this battery circularity approach, making sure that you can actually recycle some of the materials in batteries, so that it has a positive impact. I think UK is making an excuse. Norway has turned into 100% EV. Other countries in the Nordic countries as well. Look at China. Many years ago, if you go to China, you can't even see the sky. At the moment now, China has rapidly moved to EV, and they have really improved pollution in the country.
Tan Sri, we've come to the end of our discussion. It's been a wonderful session and some fantastic questions. I wanted to end by saying that we are today 1st of September. August was an important month, as mentioned by the president of Pesewa and also our MC. We had 31st of August, our Merdeka Day. 25th of August, if I'm not mistaken, is our National Women's Day, not the International Women's Day, tapi Hari Wanita Kebangsaan. But there was also another day in August which is actually important, 1st of August. Does anyone know what 1st of August this year represents? And this particular date changes every year. It changes every year. And I'm asking apart from Tan Sri because she knows the answer to this question. So I mentioned just now the resource that you must watch, which is Breaking Boundaries, the documentary that features David Attenborough and Joachim Rockström, who's a planetary scientist. So please watch that tonight or tomorrow. But the other resource that you must check out, and I love sharing resources because it's all about sharing knowledge, not just about gatekeeping knowledge, is what's known as the Earth Overshoot Day. So you can Google that, Earth Overshoot Day. And that calculates every year. It's a very neat website. It calculates every year the day on that particular year where humanity's demand for ecological resources and services exceeds what the earth can regenerate for you. That means that's the day in which we've gone too far already in terms of what we do, the demands that we take out of the earth, in terms of the carbon emission that we put, in terms of the pollution that we put out there, in terms of the food that we consume, in terms of the waste that we generate. It should be December 31st. That's equilibrium, because that's when the earth says, okay, I can absorb you for 1 year exactly, or surplus. This year, it was August the 1st. August the 1st, we had already exceeded and overshot our ecological deficit or balance sheet with Mother Earth. Is that right, Tan Sri?
Yes.
That's right. So, Tan Sri, with all this pessimism that we've discussed, let's try to conclude the session by saying that the window of opportunity is still open.
Yep.
We have still not reached tipping point yet. And I watched Joachim Rockström's
Johan.
TED Talk.
Johan
Rockström's
Joachim Phoenix.
Yes, TED Talk saying that that we are not yet at tipping point.
Yes.
There is still a small window of opportunity in which we can reverse this existential crisis that we face. Tan Sri, maybe the last word on how we should feel positive, that there is hope, but there isn't that much time for us to get our acts together.
Yeah. So Johan is a friend, and he always says we have less than 10 years. That's all we have to turn this terrible situation right now and not meet our tipping points, which are very, very close. Now, I think that the first thing I will say is never lose hope, because I am very sure that we have enough knowledge, technology, we have enough, resources for us to do the right thing. What we need to do now is make sure that, the will is there, and the will comes also from people's demands. So do not stop demanding from whoever you can demand from that you need a better planet. I always ask myself, how am I going to answer my Creator on the day of judgment? That I have this knowledge now that I have passed to you, that we have a planet in trouble and we all need to work together. And I think that is now an amanah that I have passed on to every single person in this room. You know now the situation of the planet, and every one of us has our circles of influence. Exert it. Use your voice, use whatever means you have, because this is not just for us. We are the generation that has destroyed the planet, and yet there are many, many generations to come. And I think we owe it to future generations to do the right thing. So we have the resources, we have the intelligence, we have the technology. We need now to make sure it's all used.
On that wonderful note, please join me in giving a warm round of applause for Tan Sri Dr. Jamila. Once again, thank you very much to Persiwa, to Kak Mona and her committee for organizing this wonderful talk, and all the best in galvanizing this organization and your members, and of course the community of women activists in this country, not just to find solutions for today, but also to get everyone to start thinking about the bigger questions of our planet and of humanity. Thank you very much.